Now, Moses at the burning bush has to be one of the best known stories from the whole of the Bible. I mean, how many of us first heard that whenever we were children? Yeah. And did you all draw pictures of the burning bush whenever you were children? I would say a lot of us did. Because, it is so well known, not just because it has a lot of important things to say to us, but because of where it comes in the whole big story of God, the world, and us. It's almost like the first part of a new chapter in the great story. Now, as we finish the book of Genesis over the summer, the family of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob found themselves in Egypt. God had brought them there so they could avoid the famine in the Promised Land, and also because he had raised Joseph up to be second in command to Pharaoh alone. And while they were in Egypt, God blessed them. The Egyptians became so afraid of them that they took them into slavery. And for 4 long centuries, the people of God suffered and toiled, bled and died. But as we pick up the story with Moses, in God's timing, he determines to act, to bring the people out of their bondage to freedom. And this part of the story of a great liberation to freedom, is told in the book of Exodus. And as I mentioned earlier on, we're going to focus on it the next few months, because it really does tell us about God's heart for us, of his desire to be in relationship with us and to draw us into a relationship with him. It tells of his desire to rescue us from slavery to sin and to give us a home, a place of abundance, a place of blessing and beauty. Exodus is about God's heart and our heart, and it really is worth digging into together. But the story then focuses on one person, Moses. And Moses' life could almost be divided into 3 parts. In the first part, he is miraculously rescued as a baby. If you remember the story, he was drawn out of the water, and then he was taken into the household of Pharaoh's daughter. And then when he grows and becomes a man, he rages at the injustice and the suffering of his people. And it leads him in a fit of fury to kill an Egyptian. And as a consequence, he has to flee Egypt to escape punishment for his crime. And that's the first part of his life. In the second part, God brings him through the desert to a new family, a new wife, and a new life as a shepherd for 40 years. And then at the age of 80, imagine life begins at 80. God encounters Moses, or Moses encounters God at the burning bush. And there is a great lesson for all of us in what happens with Moses. For what we find is that when God calls, God equips, and God goes with us. When God calls, he equips, and he goes with us. So first, God calls. Now, there's a verse in Paul's letter to the Romans where he speaks about us being called according to God's purpose. That God reaches out to every single one of us for a reason and with a purpose in mind. Now think about Moses. God is going to rescue the Israelites from Egypt. Does he need Moses' help? Does God need him? Well, God's plan to see the people free, does that depend on whether or not Moses accepts the call? Well, of course not. God doesn't actually need us for anything yet. He still calls Moses to be the one that he will use to set the people free. It really struck me as I was preparing this, just how incredible that actually is. Because, we get so familiar with the idea that God partners with us that we forget just how amazing the whole notion is. That the creator of the whole universe involves us with his plans. There's people like you and people like me that he calls. Why? Why does he do that? Because we were made for him. We were made to be in relationship with him. And the primary, the first, the most important call upon all of our lives is to come into a relationship with him. That's why Jesus went to the cross, to remove the barrier of sin, so that we could be embraced by God's love. If you think about it, going to church is great, and don't get me wrong, I want to encourage and urge all of you to keep coming to church. But it kind of misses the point if you come week by week, and there's no living relationship which actually goes with it. Yet maybe you're here today and you're thinking to yourself, well, I've never had a burning bush moment. I've never had God speak to me the way he did with Moses. Yet I wonder, as we heard, when Moses saw the bush, he decided to go and see it. How many times have we felt a little nudge in our spirit? How many times have we felt the urge to respond to something? Something maybe we've heard in a sermon, or something from Scripture, or maybe even a line from a hymn, or something that someone has said to us. We hear that little voice and that little thought enters our head, but then we choose to ignore it. Or indeed we choose to deliberately push it away. Maybe today you feel him speaking to you, calling to you, touching your heart, putting you on the spot, and actually making you uncomfortable. Maybe as you sit there today, you're fighting that call upon your life. But maybe like Moses, it's time that you turned aside, that you headed towards that nudge, that voice, your burning bush, and investigated with all your heart what God might be wanting to say to you. And did you notice? He called Moses by name. It wasn't just as a random human being that he said, "Son of man, come to me." But he cried out, "Moses, Moses." Because he calls each of us to that personal relationship. You and me. He calls us by name. Maybe today he's calling you for the very first time into his presence and into that relationship with him. Or maybe you have already come to him before and he's calling you out to you today because he has a special task and a purpose for you and for you alone. Because he has a special purpose for each and every one of us. And it's only when we answer his call to us that we will find out who we really are, who we were really meant to be. It's in answering his call that we truly find wholeness, fulfillment, and meaning. And when he calls us according to his purpose, he equips us for the task. So as God calls, he also equips. So second, equips. Now, as we'll be exploring over the next while, why did God call Moses? And what did he call him to do? Well, he called him to lead God's people, to care for them, guide them, direct them, to nurture, to teach, to rebuke even. God called Moses to look after his people. And what had Moses been doing for the previous 40 years? He'd been a shepherd, hadn't he? So what was God doing? He was putting him in a place where he could be trained and ready and prepared for what God would have him do. I mean, that shouldn't really surprise any of us. I mean, it shouldn't surprise us that God knows what He is doing. Because when He calls us, He prepares the way. He gets us ready, and He equips us for what He will have us do. Now, Judy and I were talking yesterday, and even today, when I had forgotten to arrange for somebody to read this morning, I was able to call upon my lovely wife, dear bless her. But we were talking about a time, just a few years ago, when she was out of the classroom, and she was actually working for one of the teachers' unions for a year. And that involved going out to all sorts of new places and meeting new people and having to learn to talk with basically anybody from the high to the low and everybody in between. And that's really not easy for someone who is naturally very shy. Little did poor Julie know about how that year with the union would help her when she ended up with little old me and she had to become a minister's wife. Because when God calls, God equips. I wonder what God has been preparing and equipping you for. I wonder what He's been laying on your heart and what He has ahead for you. And if you don't know, are you trying to find out? Here's the thing. Have you ever been asked to do anything that you really, really didn't want to do? Yeah. Well, it happens to all of us, doesn't it? And what do we do? Don't a pile of excuses roll off our lips? And what happened whenever God called Moses to go to Egypt? A pile of excuses, 5 to be exact, flowed off his lips too. Who am I to go to Pharaoh and do this? Have you ever said, oh no, I'm not up to that, or I'm not important enough, or that's too much out of my comfort zone, or oh, I couldn't do that, or oh, I don't feel like I'm up to that task, or I'm too old, even though Moses was 80, note folks, or I'm too young, or I don't have the experience, or on and on and on and on and on. Aren't those exactly the same things that Moses actually said to? How can I go when I don't even know your name, God? How can I go when the people won't believe that you sent me? How can I go when I don't speak very well and I'm too shy and I couldn't speak in front of others? Now there's truth in all of that. There's truth in that for all of us. And we all know this. But more often than not, what we really mean and what we really want to say is what Moses says last. Please send someone else. We just don't want to go because we don't want to do what we've been called to do. Because underneath some of that genuine fear of stepping out in faith, our hearts don't want to. Underneath it, we resist God's call because our hearts are hard and we haven't given them completely over to the Lord and His purpose. And we all do this. You do it, I do it, we all do it. But you know, maybe today we should be honest with ourselves and the Lord about it. Because there's part of that is disobedience. But rather than focus on the negative, let me put it to you positively. What are you missing out by not doing what the Lord calls you to? I mean, what wonders and mighty acts of God will we not see if we don't take a leap of faith? I mean, imagine what Moses would have missed out on if he hadn't gone to Egypt. Think of all the signs and wonders, the plagues, the pillars of fire and cloud, seeing the Red Sea parted, the people freed from slavery after 4 centuries at the hands of an Egyptian whip. What will you miss out on if you don't answer God's call on your life? And as we learn from the example of Moses, as I've learned in my own life, as so many of you have learned in yours, when God calls, God equips, and then He goes with us too. So finally, God goes with us. Now, when Moses doubts his own adequacy for the task, the first thing that God says to him is, I will be with you. I will be with you. Do you know, we really need to hear that. We really need to hang on to that. When God called Moses, the deliverance of the people did not depend on Moses' ability, but on the presence and the power and the sufficiency of God. God went with him. And as he went with Moses, so he goes with us. You know, it's okay to feel vulnerable. It's okay to feel out of your depth. It's okay to feel that maybe somebody else would be better suited to the task. But we all feel like that. But did you notice also the last thing that God said to Moses? Moses, don't forget your staff. Don't forget your staff. Why is that recorded? Why did God say that? Because the Egyptians despised shepherds. They looked down on them. And a shepherd's staff was a symbol of weakness, a symbol of powerlessness. And as we'll hear more, God used Moses and his staff mightily. Because it's not about us and our weakness, but about the Lord's strength. For we are all weak, but he is strong. And it is he that goes with us. I will be with you, says the Lord. I will be with you. So how is he calling you today? Is it to come into that relationship with him for the first time? Or is it for a particular task? I mean, folks, there are so many things that we need to do as a gathered family of God here. Is it as a parish reader? Maybe a Sunday school teacher? Is it to be a tea maker, someone that helps out with things like the big breakfast? Is it to be a painter and a decorator? Is it to go deeper with him this year as we go through our year of intimacy with God together? By attending the Bible studies, by coming to the prayer meetings. What is the Lord saying to your heart today? And what is your heart's answer? And will you answer his call? I will be with you, says the Lord. Will you answer his call?